we begin today with incivility and intolerance in America. It is on the rise, or so it feels. Roseanne Barr, Samantha Bee, and yes, our own president have shown us the jarring effects of incendiary rhetoric that can do more harm than good. Last week, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked to leave a restaurant in Virginia. They did not want her to eat there by the restaurant's owner. Both sides took to social media, and it seems now the whole world is weighing in on this, including Representative Maxine Waters, who had this to say over the weekend at a rally in California.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
She was asked about, you can feel the difference in our own audience. You can feel the controversy here in our own audience. She was asked about her comments yesterday on MSNBC, and she doubled down.
These members of his cabinet who remain and try to defend him, they're not going to be able to go to a restaurant. They're not going to be able to stop at a gas station. They're not going to be able to shop at a department store. The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you. This is wrong. This is unconscionable. We can't keep doing this to children.
Wow. Joining me now to discuss this and other headlines making the rounds this morning, please welcome NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Daniel Goldman, and Karamo Brown of Queer Eye on Netflix. Great to have you all here. What a morning. The sort of the culture wars and the political wars in our country, it's like drinking from a fire hose right now, right? It's overwhelming. So can we just pick it up with Maxine Waters openly calling for harassment of the Trump cabinet members because they support him? Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Well, I don't really think that Maxine is really wanting people to attack someone. You know, she's never been a woman that's actually went out. But to some degree, I do believe that she wants us to know that these individuals have been telling us that we are wrong long enough and that it's time to let them know this is not our America and it's not okay that you're trying to divide us this way.
I think that that is true, but we also have to be very careful about the words we choose. She used the phrase push back, and she said it very angrily.
And she said surround them.
Now, you can interpret that a couple of different ways. I can push back on you verbally, or I can push back on you physically. And I think in this volatile time, we do have to gauge what we're saying as leaders in the country and consider what effect that might have on people who hear it.
I think you have to put everything in the context of what we have seen over the last 2 years, which is that we have a president who, as a candidate, said that he wanted to lock up his political opponent, who said that he was going to send some enforcers to a campaign event to boot people out and to get physical. And then every day on Twitter, the vitriol and the personal attacks are ramped up. And it's creating a climate that where the political is moving over into the cultural, and everything is now being politicized, and everything is ratcheted up a little bit with the pressure and the tension. And so this is an outpouring of it. And it's,
I feel like I covered the Trump campaign closely, and I remember him distinctly calling for people who protested at his rallies to be punched in the face. Right? That he openly said, punch him in the face, and talked about taking him out on stretchers. But having said that, I have an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And if one hits the other, I don't teach them to not hit by hitting them. I don't hit my kids because I don't think you learn the lesson to not hit by receiving the same behavior. And I think Maxine Waters could use that same lesson.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
You don't call for incivility or arguably violence, because that's how it sounded to me too, in response to your own anger about what's happening at the southern border. It's not the way forward.
But I would respectfully push back a little bit on that and say that I think what she's calling for here is protest. I think she's calling for people to stand up and protest. Now,
by kicking people out of restaurants?
Yeah, actually, I think that that is what that was. And I don't think it was, it would have been incivil if they had pushed her. It would have been incivil if they had shouted at her. This was a very civil, please leave my restaurant. It was a protest. It was, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, you are the spokesperson for an administration that we feel very strongly has wronged us and has at times lied to us. And our way to demonstrate how upset we are is to protest that. And that is, I'm not going to serve you dinner.
I view it very differently between what happened with Sarah Sanders and what happened with Kirstjen Nielsen and Stephen Miller, who were yelled at and jeered while they were dining by other patrons.
Shouted down.
That's protest. That's just, everybody exercising their First Amendment right, and it's not
protest,
the
but it's
proprietor
uncivil. It's uncivil to shout it at a woman when she's sitting there.
The argument is, and this has now started really as a result of the family separation policy. That's when that everyone, I think, agrees is uncivil at a minimum.
And one of the beauties about America is you can take to the streets and you can protest that and you can get a march just as big as you want. You can get a 1 million-person march to make that point. But to me, when it's one-on-one, face-to-face, I mean, look what happened with Paul Ryan and Seth Rogen this weekend, right? The actor Seth Rogen? Well, Paul Ryan's kids wanted a picture with him. And as soon as he saw that they were Paul Ryan's kids, he said, no, I won't do it. And then he lectured the kids on how bad their dad was in front of their dad, and went on to say these kids should learn that if they like a movie or a song, the person who made that probably doesn't like their father.
Well,
that to me is so wrong.
Seth Rogen did say that where he was very conflicted about it because this was his opportunity to talk to someone that he disagreed with, but also there's children there.
He shamed them because of who their dad is.
Yeah, I would have been upset as well if I was a father and someone talked to me in a way that my children were there. But I think it could also open a conversation for those kids to understand that your father is doing some really terrible and horrible things in our country
Paul
right
Ryan?
now. Yeah, it's just the truth. This is not a good time.
What specifically to Paul Ryan?
He's not doing anything.
Yeah,
Paul Ryan hasn't done anything. I mean, honestly.
I would have served Sarah Huckabee Sanders dinner the same way that if I owned a bakery, I'd bake a cake for the guy who came in and didn't think I should be married to my wife. Because I believe that that is an approach that allows us to talk to each other. But that's not where we are, where a lot of people's mindsets are right now in this country. And it is volatile. And what makes me nervous is that it's a powder keg. And how far away are we from some kind of violence as a result of all this?
Well, look at what happened at that white supremacist rally, right? I mean, we already have seen things come to the worst they can be. I mean, you got white supremacists marching in the streets, right? And somebody gets run over. I feel like it's a spool and it's unraveling. And I would say this, you can loathe President Trump. You can loathe his policies. You can completely have zero respect for those who support him and put his agenda into work, into operation. But you have to be respectful of the people who put him in office, or you're going to get 4 more years just like these.
Maybe, but
this is going to galvanize. He's got 90% support amongst Republicans. This is going to galvanize every Republican in the country because they're going to feel like they were kicked out of that restaurant, like they were embarrassed in front of their kids, like they are so deplorable they can't even eat in a public place anymore.
That may be right, but you cannot normalize his behavior and let him off the hook.
Right. So what's the best way of doing that? What's the best way of not normalizing President Trump and his incendiary
I think by saying what you're saying, to say, yes, he's terrible, but everybody else can't do what he's doing. Yeah. Other people are allowed to fight back and to push back and to protest back. And if he's going to go down this road of daily personal attacks against everything and politicize everything, the Mueller investigation, children, the immigration. I mean, the list goes on and on. If he's going to take that tack and he's the head of this country.
You get as low as he gets.
Then, well, I mean, I don't know if you do, but it's certainly not okay that he does it and everybody else can't.
Why isn't it? Why can't you choose enlightenment and love and light and go towards that instead of going towards the hate?
I think more people should. I do agree with that. I think more people should. We should be engaging and trying to have the hard conversation with each other. But you have to understand, at some degree, people are frustrated. They're tired. And when you have been attacked and torn down constantly, it's either fight or flight. And a lot of people feel like this is the time to fight instead of having a conversation where we can learn more about each other.
But fight smart.
Of course,
fight
I agree.
Smart.
Yes.
Fight in a way that doesn't lose the very people you want to bring back over. Like what the Democrats want to do is bring back over those blue dog Democrats, right? The ones who the Reagan Democrats, the ones who vote Republican but typically have been Democrats. And there's a real question I have to tell you about whether this is the way to do it. Just as a political matter, I don't think this is a smart strategy, and I hate to see the incivility.
You don't think that moment in the restaurant galvanized both sides? You don't think there weren't people that were cheering in the streets that she did that?
I think the Democrats are already galvanized. I think they can't stand Trump, and they learned their lesson. They didn't. Yeah, but the National Review Republicans have not been. Those are never Trumpers. And I'm telling you, this is the kind of thing that will make them go to the polls and vote Trump next time around. All right, I got to leave it at that. Great to see you all.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.